I always gravitate to themes of pain and loss anyway, because a lot of my life has been spent with the fear of losing my parents. With Barzakh, the death of my dad was quite fresh in it, and even though JK's character is not like my father, um, there was a constant desire to know where he's gone, where is he, does he ever see what's happening with me or with my son, or all of those very real but imaginary thoughts. They're watching Netflix. Everyone thinks everything is fine when it comes to streaming. They watch Indian shows. I have never heard any of our Pakistani audience say anything negative just because a queer relationship is visible, or because we are showing premarital sex. So it will be fine. They know these things exist. But those are important conversations to be had. But you don't allow those conversations to happen if you're just going to be myopic and only be thinking that Asim decided to show a queer angle, or Asim decided. The important conversations never happened around Barzakh. People who found it indulgent, we couldn't have a conversation. People who found it elitist, we couldn't have a conversation because everything was about Fahashi. Some really, really great actors put their trust in me and the script and came to make this show. They all live in Pakistan. Suddenly, you're making this about something that it's not, and I am starting to feel anxious about their safety. And I came to the realization that if I want to make stuff in Pakistan, it needs to be a little more palatable to the audiences. It needs to ask less questions. I never set out to be controversial. The idea is not to ruffle feathers, as such, but at the core, it became about something that was funded to malign Pakistani thinking. And then there's no way back from that. In television in Pakistan, you'll often find same actors are doing two, three shows at the same time. So they will go from one shoot to another shoot to another. And that's just how the machinery of the television works. And there's nothing wrong with that. And, actors have to make money and do jobs, and they can do multiple jobs. But I just require that extra bit of time with the actors. And I think that especially with characters like Shahrazad's, you keep thinking that, oh, you've done one thing and you've done a second thing, and you have put in nice writing habits that you're going to work from 6 in the morning to 2 in the afternoon, and you're going to write. And all of that is very good and needed, but it's still very, very hard. And then, because if there isn't content, what are cinema owners going to do? They're going to start shutting down. There was a time when things were looking really strong, and we thought it was going to be a boom, and we had 100 screens, and we had projections saying that it was going to be 500 screens, and and the Indian content went, and that was a big hit, but there wasn't enough local content to compensate for that. This is no diss on our parents. That generation was completely different, but I feel like even though there was a lot of love, there was not a lot of conversation about feelings, about growth, about growing up.
Hi, Asim. A very warm welcome and thank you for making time to do this. I know we've been wanting to do it for a while and I'm glad it's finally happened. But Happy New Year and just delighted to get into this conversation with you.
Happy New Year to you too. Yes, and thank you, Saba. I know we were trying to do this end of last year, quite a few months, but in hindsight, I think this is probably a better time. I think not only was I busy, I think the things that you want to talk about, I've probably had time to reflect and sort of, been away from it long enough that I can probably have a more balanced conversation, I would think.
I'm so glad to hear that. Yeah, absolutely. And that's going to be amongst a lot of other
Yeah.
things that we talk about. But before we get into it, I mean, how are you?
I'm good. I'm good. I am in Leeds. It's dreary and very rainy and a full couple of weeks of snow. But I'm good. I'm good. I think I spent a little bit of time in Pakistan over the winter
Okay.
break. It wasn't very long, so I'm gonna
Okay.
hopefully try and go again. Maybe in end of Feb, March. So if
Yeah.
you're there, I might see you. But
Would love
uh,
that.
yeah, I spent time with my mom, so I think that's always good. And otherwise, just it's spending time with my kid. I have a couple of writing gigs right now that I'm involved with. Just finished a directing thing. I did season 2 of Famous Five.
Yeah.
I did one episode of that, so that was a lot of fun. It was a very those projects are very quick because we get greenlit and then sort of prep happens and shoot happens, and then it's always like a Christmas release or a Easter release. So it's all very quick, the post of it. So yeah, we were shooting, I think, end of summer, fall period, and by 23rd December, I think it aired on CBBC, and then
Oh, so it's aired. I didn't even
yeah,
realize
yeah,
that.
it's already
Oh,
out.
that's you.
It's on BB. I don't know if it's available internationally. I know it's on BBC iPlayer in the UK,
Wow.
and it's I believe season one, not season two yet. They had a deal with Hulu, so that's it's available on Hulu in the US.
Oh my God. Okay, so that must have been a whirlwind, Asim, like getting that done so quickly and
Yeah.
already being out. And how has that been?
It was great. I mean, there's a bit of a shorthand as well because I was returning to pretty much the same team. My, producer Sophie, she's amazing. So I was working with her again, and Moon Age is the production company. So it all felt a little familiar. I think the big challenge perhaps this time was, um, I was very lucky that in season one, I didn't have any tutoring hours during my block because it fell right in the summer break of the kids.
Yeah.
But this year we were shooting right after the summer break. So once school starts, they have to do a number of tutoring hours during shoot days, so their
I see.
education doesn't suffer. So it's basically almost, I don't know the technical hour limits of it, but it's a quite a bit of chunk that they have to take out.
Mhm.
Um, from their shoot period. So it was a bit of a, are we going to make days? Are we going to be able to finish this on time? And it was still a very, very tight schedule, but luckily we managed to do it, and it was lovely being with the kids. They grew so
Yeah.
much in a year. I mean, that age, you forget,
Oh
like
my
with their
God.
own kids, you're seeing them every day. So I guess I don't notice how much they're growing, but
Sure.
I'd been apart from the child actors for a year, and I kind of saw them, and like they'd shot up in height and just different. But it was great. It was great being back with them. It was great being back with a lot of the same crew. I had the same DP on. I had the same first AD on. So it kind of felt like coming
Always
back to
nice.
something. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Oh, okay, I'm gonna at least try and see if the first season is available. That'd be
Yeah.
exciting.
Yeah. Yeah.
So Asim, first of all, I wanna just ask you how to pronounce the title. Is it Barzakh? Is it Barzakh? Is it how do you say it?
It's a Barzakh.
Barzakh. Okay, so it's a break.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay, got it. So I wanna maybe like start there, Asim, and I wanna
Yeah.
start with the title because it's so intriguing. It's such a poetic word, and I know there are sort of different emotions this would evoke, but also just it probably means different things. And I want to start there to ask you what made you gravitate towards deciding that this is the right fit for this series as a title?
Yeah. Though I no longer know if it was the right fit, but I'll get to that. I think for a long time we just the working title of it was The Valley because it was all meant to be happening in the valley. But I think the more we developed it, the more time we spent about what thematically the show was really about, which was about the seen and the unseen and things that we believe in, the things that exist that the naked eye can't see. So the idea of veil and what is behind the veil kind of became quite significant. And I think uh, and a lot of my research basically, there's a lot written about on a sort of a more philosophical level about the things that I was trying to talk about in this show. Ibn Sina and like a lot of Islamic philosophers have done a lot of work on it. So Barzakh would come up quite frequently in the conversations that they were having and in the thematic considerations that they were going through. And sort of I started researching it, and I love the fact what you were just alluding to, that it just meant not just one thing. Of course, there's the very literal Islamic connotation of it, which basically means the time period between the living and sort of when you are, you come back on Day of Judgment. So it's like they're associated with the time in the grave. But for me, the more sort of the more aligned meanings were to do with the fact that it was a state of not here and not there, and that's what the show was, and that's what the state I was in while I was making the show because it was during the COVID period. And so I think it was just kind of felt very effective at that time. Of course, I think over time it became like I had used a religious word, which it really isn't. I think that people who say that haven't done enough research on it and haven't realized that any word that is simply has roots in Persian or Arabic does not mean that it is religious. Um, and that, some words have different meanings, and, philosophers are using it in a completely different connotation than what the very specific Islamic meaning of it might be.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I hear you. It's beautiful. And so I wanted to start there, but Asim, let's move now to talking about storytelling and a few reactions that I want to share with you, my own reactions to the series and just to your body of work, but right
Yeah.
now staying on the series. There's something every time I speak to people around me, like about your work, this and other stuff. It's authentic. Everyone talks about how Asim has like kind of reached this global standard of storytelling, which we don't find all that often. And you've got this very distinct way in which you tell your stories. And as I watched Barzakh, and I wrote that piece as well, which
Yes.
you read,
Yeah.
and it just seemed to me like akin to a piece of literature, really, and whether it's right from the cinematography and the frames kind of feel like poetry in motion, but then also coming to your writing and the content, and we're going to talk about writing a little later, but there's kind of this existential angst and pain that these characters are going through. And as I was thinking about this interview, the word that came to my mind was like they seem to have forged these wounded attachments,
Yeah.
in different contexts. And that almost elevates the moments of joy that are then felt, because it's kind of two sides of the same coin
Yeah.
in a sense, right?
Yeah.
Um, and I hope you don't mind my saying this, but I thought, hey, this is the product of a really twisted, edgy, and curious mind. And I mean all of this in the best way possible, right?
Yeah.
So, talk to us about what goes on in your mind as a storyteller. And what's important to you when you're telling a story like this, and how do you approach the craft of world building, because you are building out a world that is
Yeah.
messy and evocative. So talk a little bit about what you're negotiating in your mind and how you approach world building.
Yeah. I mean, what goes in my head, I think I think a lot of the time I've thought about this a lot because it's I might go on a tangent right now, but it's hopefully linked. Is till I was doing churels even. I think there was a part of me that was wanting to please, and a part of me that wanted it was still coming from a place of authenticity, but it was I'm doing this in a very authentic way, and I hope someone can see that I'm doing it in a very authentic way and can connect to it. And that means that I have connected to this stranger who has watched this. And that part of the thought process was important to me. And I think by Barzak, I had kind of let that go. And for a number of reasons, I think probably I had sort of matured in just life in terms of sort of being able to, I guess, love myself and see myself as an entity separate from needing affirmations from anyone else. Um, and uh, and the fact that I did have for Barzak, I say this quite often that I had a blank slate. I was told you've done Churels. Churels has done well. If you don't want to do a season two of Churels, you go and make whatever you want to make. Really, that is how open the mandate was. And I had said on a personal front that I will tell a very intimate, very small story. I will just tell a story of a family. But once I started writing that, I think I, I had done cake and I had done just family dynamics in a sort of a realistic setting. And for me, what was important was that I was kind of pushing the envelope for my own sanity and happiness. And I think the idea of world building kind of came from there, where I was like, oh, I want to really expand this. And I don't want to tell the story of just a Sindhi Pakistani family, but I want to sort of tell the story that is neither here nor there. It could be Pakistan, but it's never stated that it is Pakistan. And I didn't want to, you know, overcompensate by these. beliefs are different or these things are different. I just wanted those things to kind of exist and organically just be revealed to the audiences. But also going back to the first point that I was making, that I did not sort of, beyond a point, I did not care what people would think of it. And that could sound like a very sort of egoistical or selfish way of looking at something, but it really wasn't, because I think at some point we're trying to make content for ourselves, but because it is, for lack of a better word, a sort of a social good, it is consumed by audiences like it is something that they have commissioned, and whether it meets their expectations or not. Um, and with Barzakh, that wasn't the case. With Barzakh, I was like, I am being allowed to create a world that I know is going to be super indulgent and tell a story that is going to be, I mean, it breaks every trope of storytelling in the sense of what is permissible, what is sellable, what is working, what brings in the money, what brings in the eyeballs. And it kind of sort of said, no, we're going to tell the story in a very slow burn of a manner, and it will be up to the audience. If they want to switch it off, they want to switch it off and they want to go, because we are not, the success of the show was never going to be measured on how many people saw it and how people reacted to it. Um, but yeah, so I think that freedom kind of really allowed me to go to places that I don't think I usually have gone before, that I don't usually go to. Um, it was also a very quiet period. So there's a lot of research that kind of went into it. I was reading a lot. I was, I always gravitate to themes of pain and loss anyway, because, yeah, and I've said this before as well, that I've only after years of therapy, I have come to the understanding that I think a lot of my life has been spent with the fear of losing my parents, because they had me very late. So from the early days, they would be very happy that they were alive to see me and see me flourish and go to school. But I think my mind comprehended that as they have finite time. And I think to a certain degree that happens with everyone. But when there's a big age difference between parents and child when he's already very young, I think that fear is sort of elevated. And so I think those themes and keep recurring. The idea of loss and familial stuff and losing a parent. And of course, I'm sure I have my own share of intergenerational trauma, but I don't have the stuff that I'm using in Barzakh, etc. That's all kind of fiction and it's made up, but they all have pieces of me, and they all have pieces of things that I'm trying to grapple with in my own life. Whether it is, you know, with Barzakh, the death of my dad was quite fresh in it, and even though JK's character is not like my father, um, there was a constant desire to know where he's gone. Where is he? Does he ever see what's happening with me or with my son? Or, all of those very real, um, but imaginary thoughts, and hence the idea of building a world that was real, but also imaginary, and didn't matter what was what.
Yeah, completely, Asim. I believe me, I hear you on that. Yeah. Now, of course, I want to talk about the elephant in the room. I want to talk about, the decision eventually to pull it off in Pakistan, right?
Yeah.
And there's a couple of aspects of this that, I want you to kind of talk about.
Yeah.
Um, First of all, Asim, talk a little bit about what are your own guardrails around censorship as a storyteller? When you are putting something out into the world, and in the case of Barzakh, was there any contemplation in your mind about, ruffling feathers, etc.? That's one part of it. But then the other, probably more interesting part of the question is that I've heard you talk about your relationship with the audience and how you don't want them to be passive consumers of what you're
Yeah.
creating, but rather you want them to be invested in. Asim, it reminded me a lot of when I've heard Mohsin Hamid and Arundhati Roy talk about their novels. and they all look at it, they both look at it as an act of co-creation. So they're doing
Mm.
part of the work, but then part of it is also, it's, I think the way they frame it is like it's an invitation for a walk or a dance
Yeah.
with the viewer, right?
Yeah.
And with all of this drama around Barzakh, it got me thinking, how does one go about trying to achieve that with the audience then in a context where there's so much dogma and there's exclusionary politics, or however you want to frame this? So, talk first about your own guardrails with censorship, and then talk a little bit about
Yeah.
the relationship with the audience and how you circumvent it in this sort of context.
Yeah. I mean, to be honest, my own guardrails, uh, they were most present in Cake. And there's a lot of people still to this day who think Cake was my best work. So, maybe that's tied in some way or not. But I was very aware of what I was saying and not saying when I was doing Cake. And again, as I said, that does not necessarily mean um, that I was not trying to be authentic. It just meant that it came within a certain parameter and a certain awareness of who this was going to be, because it was going to be something that was going to be in cinema. And there was an active case of censorship that we knew. There was a censor board that we had to pass in multiple cities, sorry. So that was kind of understood. Uh, with Turel's, there was really no thought process, um, because I had wrongly assumed um, that Pakistan would be keen on censorship only because it was a Pakistani produced show. I said they are watching Netflix. Everyone thinks everything is fine when it comes to streaming. They watch Indian shows. I have never heard any of our Pakistani audience say anything negative just because a queer relationship is visible, or because we are showing premarital sex. So it will be fine. They know these things exist. Very naive of me, obviously. But there was no thought process when Churels was happening like that, because I was like, as long as the streamer is okay with it, which it was. Those were, very open days. There has been a lockdown for streaming globally, but during Churel's time, a lot was being shown and everything was fine, as long as we were not like, um, sort of doing something too dogmatic. It wasn't such a big deal. So Churel's happened, and then Churel's aired, and it was all fine. And Pakistanis saw it for a very long time. And then a clip of that Hina Bayat scene went viral on, I think, Twitter or Instagram or something. And then suddenly it became that this show was immoral. Um, and then sort of the Pakistani censors kind of had some kind of a conversation with Z at that point in time. Um, I've forgotten some of this, so I might get it wrong. But then they were not focused on that, Hina Bayat's character being immoral anyway. They were focused on the dance that was in episode 4 between Sarmad's character and the other guy. And they said, just take this out. And we said, we don't want to take this out. And sort of there was a tussle. Went off, it came back on. And then kind of at some point, once Dhoop Ki Diwar, I think, was releasing, Z5 was sort of banned from Pakistan. You couldn't do credit card payments. So that time I realized that there is a whole censorship thing that I kind of need to be aware of. Then came Barzakh. Now, in Barzakh, I literally did not think that I was showing something that would actually, and this is again some kind of a weird, either I shut down or I'm actually very naive, or I didn't, especially with the queer angle, because there was nothing. At least in Churels, I had a dance of them in their boxer shorts. Here, I had nothing. I had a sort of an Italian guy trying to kiss a Pakistani guy, and Pakistani guy pushing him away. I was like, this is right up their alley. They'll be perfectly fine up with that. There's a push. A Pakistani guy is rejecting homosexuality. So that really blindsided me, because I was not, I was, and also again, it was a, a picture of just before the push that was sort of a screen grab and kind of released on X again, and then it became a thing. And sort of unfortunately, what that also does, and and I want to talk about this, is it dilutes the important conversations that we should be having. There are, you've been a great fan of my work, and thank you, but there is a lot of academics, educated people who are not a fan, and that is completely okay because art is subjective, and that's fine. And they might find my work elitist, they might find it a bit classist, but those are important conversations to be had. But you don't allow those conversations to happen if you're just going to be myopic and only be thinking that Asim decided to show a queer angle, or Asim decided. The important conversations never happened around Barzakh. People who found it indulgent, we couldn't have a conversation. People who found it elitist, we couldn't have a conversation because everything was about Fahashi. And then it went. The thing that I actually thought with Barzakh that I thought would start possibly ruffling people's feathers was the idea of equating Land of Nowhere with Pakistan and saying, oh, what is this book that is in Land of Nowhere? And is that tied to religion or something like that? And what is this book of prophecies? So I thought there might be some drama around that when we got to episode five. That we didn't even get to episode five. I mean, we just got to episode three, and it just became about that, and sort of kind of went. And and I guess the decision to take it down was really there was no legal requirement because it was YouTube. There might have been if they went through all the courts and did everything. Even then, it would have been a very long and grueling process for Maria B and everyone else who really wanted to do that. But we just decided to take it out because I think there was a little bit of a bad feeling in our mouths as well, where after a while it was like, okay, you know what? Some really, really great actors put their trust in me and the script and came to make this show. They all live in Pakistan. Suddenly suddenly you're making this about something that it's not, and I am starting to feel anxious about their safety, and I'm starting to feel, especially because maybe I would have thought of it slightly differently if I was in the same city or country with them. For work, I was back in the UK during the time of release. So I just sitting away from them and not being able to see my actors, of course, my crew as well. But, crew is not the face in front of the camera. It's always the actors who kind of, get the most grief when it comes to things like this. So, I was kind of worried about them and they were worried about themselves. And Shelja, who is wonderful when it comes to things like this, was like, they were like, there's just no point having this in Pakistan anymore. And if people want to see it, they'll find a way to see it. And they did. But at least we've done something, and it feels like a win to the other side. And kind of this dies and died. So I think that's kind of how it kind of went. Your second question, remind me again.
Yeah, Asim, I was talking about, similar to this thing you talk about with vis-a-vis the audience. How does one go about forging, like, this idea of people discussing and theorizing? And, with Barzakh, there was so much potential for that, I would think,
Yeah,
because a lot was said, but a lot was also unsaid. And you
yeah.
just feel like, well, I don't know eventually whether that, that happened or not, but so much of that just got stunted. And you're not one of those people who's talking at your audience. Like I was saying earlier, it's a kind of co-creation.
Yeah.
With this environment of dogma, how does one go about trying to forge that connect? And in fact, what I'll do is, Asim, I'll tie it to my next question, which
Hmm.
is that, you're somebody who thinks and writes and directs about emotions like rage. Chirel's
Yeah.
was so much about
Yeah.
women's rage. I remember talking to you about it, and it was like, this is such a taboo thing, but how do you, galvanize that into something meaningful? So talk a little bit also about, like, does this change anything for you as a storyteller? What are you planning to do with the emotions you felt in the aftermath of this, whether that's anger, whether that's disappointment? What is that? Where does one go from here? Is there anything you've taken away from this?
Um, yeah. That's interesting. That's interesting. I mean, like I said, I was a little bit blindsided by the what happened with Barzakh. So for Barzakh, it was in an ideal world, I thought it would be all fine. People would have questions, we will have conversations, and we will, there'll be, you know, critique of it, but, we can all sort of have a nice debate around it. And you're right, that kind of got shut down. And I think, um, and I came to the realization that if I want to make stuff in Pakistan, it needs to be a little more palatable to the audiences. It needs to ask less questions. It needs to have more answers. Um, and it needs to not discuss things that the Pakistani audiences are not ready for. And I do not know if I'm okay making that content. Um, so it's a question mark. I'm not currently working on anything in Pakistan. I am most of my projects are here in the UK. I would love to. It is my home. It is in my blood. It is something that I want to keep contributing to. You know, but I don't know how to contribute without being me. And I think sometimes people can find that balance. I think, and kudos to those people, because it's not an easy task to say I'm not going to reveal that part of me. I'm going to reveal just this part because this part is more palatable and acceptable to audiences, and that's the part I'm going to take to my work. I've not figured that out yet, to be very honest. But do I want to work in Pakistan? Yes, I want to work in Pakistan. Do I, you know, and the funny thing is, it's not. I never set out to be controversial. I never set out to. The idea is not to ruffle feathers, as such. I've always believed that the feathers are getting ruffled. That's fine. But I'm not setting out to do that. I'm setting out to. And in that process, I kind of forget that maybe other people are not going to see it the way I see it. And I think that is always a bit of a shocker. Um, because I really thought, and I think Shailja thought as well, that with Barzakh, so much loss had happened during COVID. That everything else aside, you can be anti-LGBT, you can be whatever you want to, but you would take away that the essence of the story really was about what loss does to people, and how that passes on from generation to generation. That was the crux of it, and I thought that was something that all Pakistanis would be able to relate to. They'll question the length of it, or they would question the slowness of it. They will question the abstractness of it, and those were the things that I was really keen to have conversations about. But I thought at its core, it would not be about anything else but what it was about. But it became, at the core, it became about something that was funded to malign Pakistani thinking. And I think, and then there's no way back from that, you know.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. But anyway, Asim, moving from that, I want to talk about casting because it's an
Yeah.
interesting casting, and
Yeah.
I know you've probably been asked a lot, but I want to talk about Fawad. Let's start there, and then
Yeah.
a couple of other people. But one thing I felt was that his whole star persona seemed to have been kind of stripped away. We don't see Fawad the star in this show, and I don't think it doesn't seem like that's how he approached it either. And clearly, that wasn't what your
Yeah.
expectation was either. And I guess I was just thinking that as a director, that must be really incredible to watch and direct, right? That this is really, that's kind of shed away, and he's come to it in a really unassuming manner. Talk about that casting, but also just the experience of, kind of seeing that happen.
Yeah. Well, the casting was it was funny. It was probably the last character that was cast. I obviously
Mm.
was not. Yeah, I've said this many times, but just for completeness, I'll say it again. That I was really not expecting someone like Fawad to do this show, because I guess I thought it was indie, and he was probably gonna do. He was being what appeared as an outsider, that he was being choosy with what he was going to be part of and not part of. And somehow, again, the way we are sort of brainwashed to understand other people, that in my head, like everyone else's, had translated into the fact that um, uh, he was looking for star-driven shows, like where he could sort of be the only anchor of that project. But we sent the script. He liked it. There was, you know, asked for more scripts, a quick Zoom, and he was in. And so I think that was kind of already quite incredible, and I think that was one of the first conversations we had. I was like, look, I didn't think you were going to do this. And he said, why did you think I was not going to do this? I have done ensembles before. I do sort of group kind of dynamics. I've done it, and so there's no reason for anyone to assume otherwise, which is fine. And then the thing is, I think I'm not in a best place to comment on the difference between someone's star persona, because I have been super, super, super lucky throughout that no one has actually come to anything that I do as a star, Even when I was doing Cake, Sanam and Amna, at that time, I was looking at much smaller cast. I thought it was going to be a small project. I was going to go, probably get some theater actors, etc. And then sort of Sanam and Amna both said yes. But they came with, I think as an outsider, we all sometimes assume that they're stars first and actors later, but they're always actors first. They are in this because they have this desire to perform and be vulnerable on screen, and sort of tap into these characters. And I think those are the exciting parts for them. And I think for Fawad is no different, because he came in and he loved what the show was, what the show represented. And he was like, I'm one cog in this, and I'm willing to be that cog, and I'm willing to do my part for what this show is. And we met up, like, a few months ago, and he said the same thing. He was like, look, despite everything, I'm really, really proud of the show, and I'm really glad I did it. And I think that's just a testament to him as a human being, as a actor. And so I think there wasn't, I think he just, that's him. He came without a star person. I think that probably it's the people who are doing the sort of the bigger budget stuff where they have to create the star persona. It's probably that is sort of, it's rather than me subtracting something from him, that's probably the add-on, if you know what I mean. Um, but uh, but yeah, and I think it's interesting. There's been so much. I'm just going to go on a tangent now, but I think it's sort of interesting to mention this, that there's been so much conversation amongst critics and also just avid TV viewers, etc., about Fawad's choices. And it's been sort of interesting to kind of read that, because this again is what I was saying earlier, that social good kind of becomes something that you have authority over and you have the right over. Um, but you forget that these are human beings who have chosen a job that they love, but we are all doing our job. And our first commitment is to ourselves, and that is to do things that we enjoy, that bring us happiness. Whether that brings you happiness, we would love for it to bring you happiness, but that can't be primary, and our own desires be secondary. It has to, and for Fawad as well, it was like, why did he do Barzakh? And why is he doing this film in Bollywood now? And why is he saying no to Pakistani scripts? Maybe because for him, those Pakistani scripts don't work. Maybe for him, he thought Barzakh was an opportunity, or he wanted to be that character. Same thing with the Indian film he is doing. So this constant judgment, you can love your fans, you can critique your fans, but to have a constant judgment on what one should or should not be doing, even if he is the pride of Pakistan, which he is, you are a pride of a place by being authentic and true to yourself. I am no good to Pakistan, my family, or anyone if I am being inauthentic in what I do. And I think the same thing applies to Fawad, that he has to do things that he is happy with. And you as an audience need to find joy in the actor's joy.
Yeah, Asim, because I was reading this myself, and there is a lot of judgment around that. I know also with the Bollywood stuff now, and you're absolutely right. And I want to talk a little bit about Sanam because
Yeah.
this is not your first outing with Sanam.
No, it isn't.
And I read that you'd said that she is a kind of blend of, I guess, vulnerability, but also strength,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
that just fascinated me. Talk a little bit about, casting her. She's incidentally, when I did a podcast with her in Karachi, she spoke about, at that time, I think this was in the
Ha-
work.
Yeah.
So, and she'd just spoken about just what a treat it is, and the fact that nobody writes like you.
Oh,
So she
thank
was she was like, you seek out those sorts of
you.
scripts. And
Yeah.
I kind of was curious to ask you what makes you come back to her, talk a little bit about that.
Well, it's exactly what that strength and vulnerability thing is. Sanam is not, when you meet her, she's not the warmest of people. At least I think so. Yeah. So she has this hardness and coldness, but it's not just that. And I think I find that fascinating. I find that she is not completely detached and completely aloof, but that part of her is there. And I love playing with that and adding the vulnerability kind of on top of it. She's also a chameleon. So, she can transform into characters really, really well. And I think that was really the key to Sherazad's character because it was the most difficult character to portray in Barzakh, to be honest, because she was not fully human and she had sort of the magic of the land within her. And to be able to communicate that with your eyes or with small gestures or the way she would crack her back or the way she would just look at you. And Sanam brought a lot to that because she was worried, rightfully so, that this is a difficult character. How am I going to kind of portray this? So I think a big part of her appearance was the contact lenses that she wears, and they made they were slightly bigger, and it sort of kind of transformed her look, and of course working with costume and wardrobe and all, the rest of the team, but the she was fully vested and what she needed to bring to this character. And I think Sanam and luckily most of the actors that I work with are very, very good with giving me rehearsal time and very, very good with not taking on too many projects at the same time. Um, so in television in Pakistan, you'll often find same actors are doing two, three shows at the same time. So they will go from one shoot to another shoot and another. And that's just how the machinery of the television works. And there's nothing wrong with that. And, actors have to make money and do jobs and they can do multiple jobs. But I just require that extra bit of time with the actors. And I think that, especially with characters like Sherazad's, to be able to build those during rehearsals, during debates and conversations and chats. And I think Sanam is always really willing to do that. I knew that from Cake because we had lots of rehearsal time during Cake as well. So I think just that is for me very exciting to be able to spend that much time with an actor. And I think she keeps bringing that to me. And that's why I keep going back to her.
Yeah, Asim, and that sounds like such a generative process, right? Because you're doing different iterations and sounds amazing. And on an aside, I was going to say to you, I'm probably preaching to the converted, but I always think this about Sanam that so last year at the Karachi Literature Festival, we were doing a panel on cinema. And this really struck me that she and Mohib were on the panel and I was moderating it. And this shouldn't really shock, but it did shock me, Asim, that she was one of the few actors who doesn't come with the whole bells and whiskers of it, and also just, and she's a star in her own right. She's an
Yeah.
amazing actor. So it's not, you can't downplay that. But she and Mohib were the two people who, she never asked me, what is KLF going to pay me? Or like,
Yeah.
it just, this shouldn't shock, but it really shocks
Yeah.
because that is very much the exception rather than the rule in the Pakistani entertainment
Yeah.
industry.
Yeah.
And there's this part of her that really gets it, gets the intellectual part, gets the literary part. And I completely hear you, but it's probably such joy,
It
right?
is, it really is, and I think that's why it's so exciting to always be working with her because
Mm.
um it's not one way. It's I am learning and her viewpoints are informing my scripting and my
Mm.
decision making as a director. And I think that sort of circularity is always what a writer director is looking for.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Asim, I also want to talk about the other Fawad.
Yeah,
And this seems like there's something extra edgy and special about actors who have a theater training. I mean, I even notice this a lot with India. And I was recently watching a series by Jaideep Elawat. And I mean, I'm a huge fan of his
yeah,
work, effortless.
yeah,
And I just felt that with Fawad as well,
yeah.
and I guess there's just his body of work shows you that edginess, that profundity. Talk a little bit about that.
Well, I can go on for hours about Fawad. He he was into Rails as well. He was someone that I
Right.
had also
Yes, he
spoken
was.
to, but it never materialized while Cake was happening. And
Right.
I find his ability again to transform and to absorb the script, maybe because he's a writer himself as well, fascinating. And I think that's the thing with theater actors because theater doesn't pay you very well. Theater doesn't transform your lives. So for you to be doing theater, you have to be obsessed with what you do. You have to be fully there in the performativity of all of it, in embodying these characters. And I think that's kind of what Fawad brings. And again, this was not with Sanam, of course, there was obviously a lot of work that needed to go in that development of that character. But for Fawad, it was all what was on paper, and it was sort of, but everything had meaning when we started having those conversations. The fact that he would hold a rumal, the way he would hold it, how clammy his hands would get when, the little twitch that he had in his eyes when his father would speak to him, the fact that he would look down and speak, everything was discussed, talked about, and a lot of it was brought by Fawad. And I think so that again, that investment in maybe in television and film actors, that investment might surprise you. But I think that investment is sort of the go-to for theater actors. Like you can even, and I think that applies to a lot of them. Like in Simon's film, Ali Junejo was, he's a theater actor, phenomenal. But I think they all are able to bring their 101% and their focus, and to be able to separate the craft from the business, who's getting paid what am I getting paid, all of those things are almost to an extent secondary for someone who lives and who needs this performance and art and acting as sort of a life source. So I think that's what makes Fawad so special.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Asim, I said to you earlier, I want to talk a little bit about writing, because it can be, and especially in your work, like it's not necessarily a linear trajectory. And Barzakh is a key example of this, right? There's so much going on. There's stuff that's got to be said, but there's a lot of silences, and, things have to be conveyed. Otherwise, talk a little bit about how you plot stories and characters. Like, talk about the writing process. Did you have a writer's room? I mean, and what is it like personally for you, the writing journey?
It's hard. And it never gets easier. And you keep thinking, I mean, I don't know, you're right as well, so I don't know how it is for you, but like you keep thinking that, oh, you've done one thing and you've done a second thing and you have put in nice writing habits that you're going to work from 6 in the morning to 2 in the afternoon and you're going to write. And
Mm.
all of that is very good and needed, but it's still very hard. And I think Barzakh was a beast, completely different beast. And I think I had a lot of time to do it. So I think, a good portion of a year was spent on it. Um, and I did not have a writer's room. But what I did have was two incredible script consultants who were reading everything, who were helping me sort of, keep tabs on any loopholes, any plot issues that we would and again, as you said, like figuring out what was seen, what was unseen, what was said, what was unsaid, and all of those things kind of went through them. Of course, Shilja herself, my producer commissioner, she is, she was also keeping tabs on those things. But I
Mm.
think there was no, especially the earlier few months, it's very start and stop for me. And again, this is very individual, so it varies. I do a lot of index cards.
Yeah.
I sort of have coke boards and kind of make a lot of character notes, etc. Keep going back to them, plot my A storyline, B storyline, C storyline, kind of follow that through scripts, standard stuff that actors do. But I think it's a lot of just staring at the blank page as well. I say that while there's a blank page right here waiting for me to go back to once I'm done with the talking to you. There's a lot of that, and I think it's having the resilience to not get frustrated with it. For me, that is the most important thing. I think it is very easy, and the thought does cross my mind every week, the doubts, the you're not a good writer, you don't know how to write, you're going to be stuck on this blank page forever, you're not going to meet your deadlines. But I think this having the resilience to move past those and say you've been here before and you've survived it and you're going to survive it again. And I think then it starts forming, and I think then it becomes, once few months have passed and it's all kind of flowing, and then the characters are talking to you, and I think that doesn't always happen, but once that happens, it is probably the most beautiful thing in the world, because you've created these imaginary characters who are now, for your intents and purposes, alive,
Yeah.
and speaking to you and telling you that, sorry, you might want to move me here, but I want to go there, and I have to go there to explore, and they're probably more right than I was originally. So I think all of those things are the fun things, but I think getting to those um, is hard, and I think having checks and balances in place. If it's not a writer's room, then it's script consultants, it's trusted readers, it's
Yeah.
your commissioners and your producers who are constantly keeping an eye on the stuff and seeing you're not going too off track, or even knowing the balance that a writer is allowed to go a bit off track, but kind of bringing it back in whenever needed.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So, Asim, you did the whole writing yourself for
I
Barzakh.
did. I
Oh
did.
my God. I just assumed you had a writer's room. I don't know
No, I
why.
didn't have a writer's room. The physical writing was all me. The ideas, of course, came from script consultants and other people as well. Uh,
Right.
but yeah, it was hard. It was hard, very hard.
I hear you when you talk about the character speaking back to you. Like, I just feel it gets immersive for you, but it
Yeah,
also then becomes kind of dialogical, right?
yeah,
And that's where the magic really happens. You're right.
absolutely.
Obviously, that takes
And I
certain.
think that's the high that us junkie writers are kind of always chasing, because it's not always there, but you kind of, as long as you can keep your eye on that prize, and I think that's the way to, because I know a lot of writers who kind of give up
Yeah.
very early, and I think it's just having the stamina to just
Yeah.
hold it a bit longer.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Now, Asim, tell me something. I've said this to you even otherwise, but also in the piece I wrote about Barzakh, that for me it invoked a really Marquez-like vibe, and I
Yeah.
already said to you that it feels like literature and all of that. And we've obviously got a rich legacy in the subcontinent of this, which doesn't get spoken about all that often. And I realize I've never asked you this, but are there inspirations you draw from subcontinental voices as well, like past, whatever? Um, is that something
Um,
that you've exposed
I
yourself?
think subconsciously, I think it's not like even the Marquez thing, and while I kind of agree with it from in hindsight and an objective point of view, and sort of something that Shilja brought up very early in our
I see.
process, that's what it was looking like, but it wasn't deliberate. It's just that I love that book. I have read it many times. It's seeped into you. So I think it's the same thing. I think I am. All the brilliant writers that we've had, I've read bits and pieces of them, and I think there's a part of
Mm.
that kind of travels through. In terms of specific adaptations, I haven't, but I would love to do a pure fantasy set somewhere in sort of inspired by our world and our world building that has been excellent in our historical books.
Yeah,
That's something that I've kind of not tapped into, but I would love to.
yeah, 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 yeah. And Asim, okay, we're drawing towards the conclusion, but I have a last couple of
Mhm.
questions. One is talk a little bit about where we are in terms of storytelling in Pakistan right now. And I kind of say this across mediums, right? So, film, television, whatever else, OTT shorts, whatever's in the mix. Where do things stand? And do you feel, as a writer, director, but also as a consumer, do you feel, I mean, that's a terrible word, but you understand, or
Mhm.
as an audience, rather, let me
Yeah.
say, are we headed in the right direction? I mean, what's going on?
I don't know what direction we're headed in. Let's talk about television. I think there is. I think there is better stuff happening now, which is a positive thing. It's not to say that all those regressive 7 p.m. shows are not being made yet, but there are some things that are different. Some
Mm,
channels that have experimented with doing mini series rather than doing the 30, 40 episodes. Some storytelling that has been sort of different. It's
yeah.
still a little commercial for my taste, but it's still different. I think that's exciting to see. And I think it's exciting to see that we are not um, uh, just doing the same thing again and again. I think visually it's getting stronger. I
Mm,
think a lot more trained cinematographers, production designers, etc., are kind of coming in. So I think that all of that aspect of television is exciting. Could there be more experimentation? Yes. I think
mm,
it really is. I think they need to strike a balance. Like, for example, Green tried to do a lot of different things. Uh, are they profitable? I don't know. But perhaps if that model, I don't know if it works or not, but if that model is not working, maybe a scenario where you're doing a little bit of what ARY and Hum does, but you're also doing a little bit of what Green does. And I think it's just figuring out that balance where you kind of cater to all sorts of audiences, and
mm,
also knowing that if something is really profitable for you, you can funnel some of that to a less profitable show if it kind of makes sense from another perspective, if it's going to kind of, because TV is our biggest medium, and
mm,
it's all fair to say our audience doesn't want it, but the job is also to change audiences tastes over time. It's they're not used to it, so it's not like I'm gonna brainwash them into finding other stories interesting and not finding the ones that they find interesting. But it's we are the same people who used to love Tanaiya and
yeah.
Dhoop Kinare and all of that stuff. Na? We were, it's not like suddenly we are more, um, we were masses then as well. We had issues back then as well. We were mostly under Zia at that time. So it's not like issues didn't exist. So I think there is just like, but then I mean, that's a whole different thing that, Star Plus happened, Indian content happened, soaps happened, and we sort of started modeling our thoughts around that, and then kind of that became the norm. And so I understand that will change slowly, but I think once you start just doing your bit as a financier, as a television broadcaster owner, um, I think that change can happen. You can sort of keep, audiences will be like, oh, this is not what I watch, but it's kind of interesting. And then another show like that happens, another show like that happens. That's fine. Um, Film, I really have no idea. I
Mm,
have not been following it so much. I don't know what has come out in the last year. I have not heard of any exciting stuff that's coming out. I have not done, certainly not heard of anything that has been made a splash like Mola Judd did since that time. And I feel there are two ways. You either tap into the whatever the Mola Judd model is, which is super commercial, but still super authentic, and super interesting in that way. And it's not a copycat of something. It stands in its own right, and it's great. And then what we always say, but God knows when it's happened because it's so tied to other political policies, is sort of investment from government in arts. It's it's having film funds. Every country that has festivals, that has films that go to Cannes or Berlin, et cetera, have funds that they can tap into. They don't need to be big funds, but small funds that people can use to develop
yeah.
their projects, or small funds that can kind of give them completion funds, or whatever the case may be. But some kind of grant system from the government is necessary for different voices to be heard. and for more content to be created because and then because if there isn't content, what are cinema owners going to do? They're going to start shutting down. We have never, there was a time when things were looking really strong and we thought it was going to be a boom and we had 100 screens and we had projections saying that it's going to be 500 screens and and the Indian content went and that was a big hit. uh, but there wasn't enough local content to compensate for that. And I think the thing is, the smaller films can't make money just from box office. You don't
Mm.
break even. So a lot of that money is money that you've gotten from government funds that you don't have to repay back, that no one has to recoup. So that means your actual cost of funding becomes much less, right? Certainly not, this is the analogy is not to compare Pakistan to the UK. I mean, it's apples and oranges. But for example, here, if you're making sort of a middle range film, so that's between say under 15 million pounds, you get 40% of their money back in tax rebates from the government.
Right,
Yeah.
right.
So it's models like that. Maybe they don't have to pay. Maybe there are no taxes on smaller films, etc., etc. But there has to be some kind of active policy making and follow through on that policy for us to see any meaningful change, to be honest.
Yeah, yeah, sure. Asim, I wanna ask you a little bit. It's a personal question, but we
Yeah.
spoke about it at the beginning, which is, you are obviously balancing, like many of us are, you're balancing ambition with other priorities.
Yeah.
And I've got a basic but pretty complex question, which is, I mean, not just how are you doing that? And in particular, I want to talk about like fatherhood, right?
Yeah.
And we were talking about it earlier. Talk about that juggling act, but also talk about like what sort of father are you? Like talk a little bit about that. I'm just fascinated because even with Barzakh, you've explored the family drama now with masculinity this time.
Yeah.
And I'm just curious to ask you how are you striking this balance and what sort of father are you?
Maybe my son Azam is better equipped to answer that, but he's not here. He's at school right now.
Yeah.
Um, I think I think the one thing that me and my partner are working really hard on is sort of being emotionally available for the kids. And I think this is no diss on our parents. That generation was completely different. But I feel like even though there was a lot of love, there was not a lot of conversation
Yeah.
about feelings, about growth, about growing up, about um, things that impact us as toddlers and tweens and teenagers. And I think it's just having a bit more of an open dialogue, knowing that of course you have to respect their boundaries, and especially when they become teenagers, they probably don't want to have long conversations with you.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
But I think just making sure that they know that you're emotionally, psychologically fully available for them to have those conversations when they're ready. And I think for me, that open dialogue thing has been the most important thing that I've done. Um, and then, of course, this is easier said than done, and I don't fully do it. But he's very good at telling me, when you're hanging out with me, don't use your phone too much. Don't do this. Don't. He's very vocal, and I feel that's a blessing to know that you've done something right. If your 11-year-old can be vocal about things, you've traveled too much this year. You've gone, so those are. And then we have active discussions about, he knows how much I love what I do. I've never tried to hide that fact. He knows that I love writing, I love directing, and I think initially we had conversations about why can't dad have a normal 9 to 5 job, but that those don't happen. I think I would like to believe um, that he sees the benefit of that as well. That when I'm working from home, I can be more available, etc., or I can be at events that daytime events during weekdays, etc., that perhaps some other parents can't. So I think he understands that it'll always be a juggling act, but he is very attached. Of course, none of the trips that I take or none of the shoots that I do that are away from him go down well. But I think we try and I don't know if you've noticed this with your girls, but like they don't like FaceTime, they don't like video calls. So I think
I
that
agree.
that's sort of in the early days, like even actually not even early days, even when I was doing Barzakh, I would get so homesick and I would miss him. But like, I would FaceTime, but they would be short conversations because I think they just don't enjoy it. And then when you're face to face, they have all of these amazing things to tell you about their days and about their life, etc. So I kind of miss that, and I think he misses that as well. Um, but I think just working working on being as present as possible. And I think the most interesting double-edged sword of parenting is that it kind of forces you to reevaluate yourself as humans and sort of deal with, it sounds like a bit of a cliche, but like as long as you've not put your trauma to bed and your issues to bed, you can't fully be there. And so um just working on ourselves. I think both me and my partner, we constantly try. We make mistakes all the time, and but we sort of give ourselves that grace that no one's perfect, and we are all making mistakes, and we are all trying to muddle through. But we every month, every year, hopefully doing a better job than we were before when doing, having quieter, meaningful conversations more than like ordering of or telling kids that they must obey orders or those kind of things. And I think but it's also unpacking everything that you've been brought up with, you're right. And I think it's a complex, very rewarding, but probably more complex than even Barzakh being a father.
That's so well put. I think it's the hardest thing I've done, Asim, also
Yeah.
because there is no playbook, right? And you kind of are constantly second guessing yourself. But it sounds like you guys have this openness about um, you know, being willing to absorb from the child as
Yeah.
well. Because a lot
Yeah,
of people kind
absolutely.
of shut them down, and I don't think that's conducive either.
Yeah.
And sometimes when you're shown the mirror, I think that's quite important.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And I think he constantly keeps me in check,
Yeah, yeah,
Why
I
are you
love
moody today?
yeah.
You said that too loudly, and I'm like, oh, tone check. Okay, good. But
Yeah.
it's good. It's
Because
good.
we've got these blind spots, right, Asim? And
Yeah,
it's easy to kind of yeah, completely. Last question,
yeah.
Asim. I want to share a quote with you that I heard at NYU a few years ago. And it really made me think about things a little bit differently, even about like just my passion for being a storyteller and writing and all of that stuff. And it was a quote by Henry David Thoreau, but this is kind of the person who was sharing it. It was like a mashed up version of it. And it said something like, most men and women lead lives of quiet desperation and go to the grave with the song still in them. So he said, most men and women lead lives of quiet desperation and go to the grave with the song still in them. And the person was talking to a bunch of our students here, and he said, take 5 minutes and scribble your song on a piece of paper and share it with the person sitting next to you.
I
And I
like it.
just remember in that moment, Asim, I just felt like something within me shifted because I had to contend with this metaphorical song, so to speak.
Yeah.
And I want to end by asking you kind of, what is your song?
I guess these are all my songs that are coming out of me, right? I think all I would say Cake, Barzakh, all of these, and I think um really uh, having having a blessed family life, having done whatever I can for my parents. My father's, as you know, has passed away now, but my mother's still around, but she's old. And I think being as present as I can be for her, being as present as I can be for my partner and my child. But at the same time, being able to grapple with things like, for me, the beauty of writing and directing has always been that it has kept me away from more sinister ways of dealing with melancholy or more sinister ways of kind of approaching life or falling into I don't use the word depression lightly, but like falling into some kind of exacerbating mental turmoil. And I've always been this side of that because of the songs that I'm able to kind of write and kind of share with the world. Whether the world loves them or not is a sort of a different story. But at least the genesis of all of those things are me dealing with everything observable and not observable about this world and this universe that I'm trying to get to terms with before I go to my grave.
Yeah.
So I think that is it, and I would like to think that there are a few more songs left, but but yeah,
Yeah, no, that's lovely. Asim, thank you so much. This has been a rare treat, and I know you're busy, so I really appreciate it.
no,
And
thank you for
I
having me.
know,
It's
I
always
know.
I haven't done a single interview after Barzakh. I was like the first person I will speak to will be Saba, so it's
Oh, that's such a privilege. Really, I appreciate that, Asim. And thank you so much. And we're looking forward to all of those other songs.
yes, yes, fingers crossed.